Did you know that Rutger Hauer, the man behind Roy Batty and Blade Runner, improvised one of the most iconic lines in science fiction history just hours before filming? It wasn't in the script. In fact, the original lines were longer, clunkier, and full of jargon. Hauer took a pen, slashed them down, and gave Ridley Scott something spare and poetic instead. A dying android, crying in the rain, reflecting on the beauty of life. It was haunting and human, and it changed everything. That scene made Rutger Hauer a legend, but it also told you everything you needed to know about him, that he wasn't just an actor playing a part. He was an artist, a disruptor, a soul who never fit neatly into boxes. He spent his life drifting between Dutch art house films, strange Hollywood thrillers, brutal horror flicks, and deeply personal indie projects. He built a legacy. This is the story of one of cinema's most mysterious, poetic, and unpredictable stars. This is what happened to Rutger Hauer. Let's fade to black. Rutger Olsen Hauer was born on January 23, 1944, in the small town of Breakout in the Netherlands, right in the final year of Nazi occupation. His parents were both actors who ran a drama school, but Hauer didn't take a straight path into the family business. He was already drifting early on. At 15, he ran away to join the Merchant Navy. He said he wanted to see the world and maybe escape the expectation of who he was supposed to be. He sailed for a year but found himself constantly seasick and colourblind, which cut short any dreams of a full career at sea. So he returned home and enrolled in acting school, and then dropped out. Twice. Even then, Hauer wasn't one to follow anyone's script, but when he finally committed, it stuck. His big break came in 1969 when he starred as the lead in a Dutch TV swashbuckler called Floris, directed by a then unknown Paul Verhoeven. It was a kind of medieval action-adventure series with real charm and physicality, and Hauer became a household name in the Netherlands almost overnight. The camera loved him. He looked like a classical hero, but there was always something a little unusual behind the eyes, a contradiction that made you want to watch him closer. And the more I've revisited his work over the years, the more I've noticed something I didn't appreciate when I was younger. He was an actor who performed with his eyes. I know that sounds like something you could say about a lot of actors, but with Hauer it was different. He had a powerful physical presence, sure, but it was those eyes. Cold, soft, searching, dangerous. I mean, they did all the heavy lifting. Whether he was playing a replicant, a knight, a drifter, or a villain, he always seemed to be holding something back and letting it leak out just enough for the camera to catch it. That's what drew me in. I think that's what drew all of us in, whether we knew it or not. He would explode onto the screen in Turkish Delight in 1973, again with Verhoeven. If Floris made him a star, Turkish Delight made him a phenomenon. It was raw and erotic, tender and shocking, the kind of film that splits people down the middle. Hauer played a passionate sculptor in a relationship that's as volatile as it is magnetic, and his performance was fearless. Sometimes angry, sometimes naked, sometimes deeply vulnerable. The film was a critical and box office smash in the Netherlands and remains one of the country's most important movies. And suddenly, Hollywood was interested. To American casting directors, Rutger Hauer looked like a blonde-haired leading man, but what they didn't realise was that he came loaded with something deeper, something stranger. He could play the hero, but he could just as easily turn that energy upside down and make you squirm. Rutger Hauer's American debut came in 1981 with Nighthawks, a gritty thriller starring Sylvester Stallone and Billy Dee Williams. Hauer played Wolfgar, a ruthless international terrorist with icy eyes and a killer's smile. It wasn't a huge hit, but Hauer's performance stood out. He brought something that felt unpredictable, detached, like he wasn't just playing a villain. And in a genre loaded with tough guys and one-liners, that quiet intensity was unsettling in all the right ways. Critics took notice, and so did filmmakers. Hauer didn't look like a typical Hollywood outsider. With his blonde hair, striking features and athletic build, he could have easily been slotted into romantic leads or heroic roles, but there was something lurking just under the surface. A strange stillness in his performances, a simmering tension. You never knew if he was about to kiss someone or kill them, and that made him compelling. He followed up Nighthawks with the Osterman Weekend in 1983, a Cold War conspiracy film directed by Sam Peckinpah, best known for The Wild Bunch. It was Peckinpah's last film, and by most accounts a troubled production. But even amid the chaos, Hauer held the screen. Still, his roles were inconsistent. Some good, some forgettable. He didn't chase marquee projects the way others might. He seemed to prefer scripts that let him disappear into ambiguity. Then in 1982, in the same year he was still getting his footing in the US, a role came along that would define his entire career. It was a science fiction film set in a decaying future, a noir-drenched, neon-lit world filled with shadows, smoke, and moral uncertainty. And in the middle of it, Hauer would play an artificial life form on the run from his own expiration date. Ridley Scott's 1982 sci-fi noir was a film full of bold visuals and complex ideas, but it needed a heart. And in Roy Batty, the leader of a group of synthetic humans known as replicants, it found one. On paper, Batty is the antagonist, a dangerous runaway built in a lab, but Hauer refused to play him as a villain. Instead, he made Batty soulful, curious, brutal, yes, but also deeply aware of the ticking clock inside his chest. Hauer saw what the character could be, a metaphor for life itself, and he brought that vision to set every single day. I felt that the replicants were more human than the humans, he once said, that they had more soul, more fear, more desire to live, so I played Batty that way. The studio didn't always love what he was doing, Ridley Scott wasn't always sure either, but when it came time to shoot the final scene, Batty, rain-drenched, dying on a rooftop, Hauer took the script, rewrote the monologue himself, and delivered one of the most iconic moments in film history. I've seen things you people wouldn't believe. All those moments will be lost in time, like tears in rain. And it floored everyone on set. That single scene transformed the entire film. It gave the replicants, these artificial creations, more emotion, more longing, more beauty than the humans chasing them. And it turned Hauer into a cult legend almost overnight. Critics were split on Blade Runner when it first came out. Some didn't get it, some found it too cold. But one thing everyone agreed on, Rutger Hauer was unforgettable. Years later, even Harrison Ford, who was famously miserable during the shoot, admitted that Hauer's performance was the soul of the movie. For Hauer, though, Blade Runner was about mortality and art. He didn't try to repeat it, he didn't cash in, he simply moved on. But that moment, that rain-soaked goodbye, it followed him everywhere. And for fans of science fiction, for lovers of cinema, and for actors trying to say something honest in a dishonest industry, that monologue became sacred. Apparently about 96% of you who watch these videos aren't subscribed. If you're part of that 96% and you've made it this far, then you change that. It really helps keep the channel going, and there's loads more like this coming up. After Blade Runner, Hollywood didn't quite know what to do with Rutger Hauer. He wasn't box office, he wasn't a conventional heartthrob, and he wasn't easy to pin down. But for a certain kind of filmmaker and a certain kind of fan, that made him irresistible. Rather than chasing big studio roles, Hauer took a left turn and embraced the offbeat, the cult, the dangerous, and what followed was a string of performances that were sometimes flawed, often fascinating, and never boring. In The Hitcher in 1986, he delivered what might be his most terrifying performance, a quiet, icy drifter who stalks a young man across the American desert. There's no clear motive, no backstory, no logic, just a sense that you're watching something evil, not in the cartoon sense, but in the existential one, a force of nature in human form. The film massively divided critics, with some calling it nihilistic and sadistic, but Hauer was mesmerizing. He didn't overplay it, he didn't snarl or rant, he just used those eyes again, and somehow that was worse. That same year he played a cursed knight in Ladyhawke, a medieval fantasy directed by Richard Donner. In anyone else's hands the role could have felt hokey, but Hauer made it tragic, romantic. His chemistry with Michelle Pfeiffer gave the film its heartbeat, and it showed he could do earnest just as well as eerie. Then there was Flesh and Blood in '85, again with Paul Verhoeven, a brutal, grimy medieval action drama full of plague, rape and betrayal. It's a nasty film, really. That's one that leaves you feeling like you need a shower. But again, Hauer is hypnotic. Equal parts charismatic and dangerous, the kind of character you want to follow even when you know you shouldn't. By the late 80s, he'd carved out a space all his own. Blind Fury in 1989 gave him a chance to flex his charm and action chops, playing a blind swordsman inspired by Japanese cinema. It's cheesy and camp, sure, but it's fun, and Hauer clearly got the tone. This was his zone. Genre movies that were just off-center enough to feel special. He wasn't afraid of B-movies, he elevated them. He gave dignity to characters that would have been forgettable in someone else's hands, and even when the films didn't work, and a few of them really didn't, you never blamed him, because he was always interesting to watch. Rutger Hauer wasn't building a legacy the Hollywood way, He was building it one strange, beautiful role at a time. By the early 90s, Rutger was no longer the enigmatic star Hollywood didn't know how to use. He was quietly drifting out of the mainstream altogether. Not dramatically, some of it may have been down to timing. He was never the type to charm producers or make the rounds at parties. He just wanted to work. And for a while that meant saying yes to whatever came his way. The roles during this period were hit and miss. A few underwhelming thrillers, some oddball genre flicks, the occasional TV movie. It felt like he was circling the same types of characters. Grizzled loners, haunted men with murky pasts. He could still do it, of course. That strange magnetism was still there, but the projects just weren't as strong. Instead of forcing something that didn't feel right, though, Howard gradually started returning to Europe. Smaller films, passion projects, art house dramas, things that gave him more creative freedom, or at least fewer expectations. And away from the noise, he found space to breathe again. He starred in Escape from Sobibor, a harrowing true story about a prisoner revolt at a Nazi death camp. The film was tough, emotionally raw, and grounded in reality, and Howard delivered one of his most restrained performances. It earned him a Golden Globe for Best Supporting Actor, but he didn't use it as leverage for a comeback. He just quietly moved on to the next thing. During this time, he also became more active off-screen. He founded the Rutger Hauer Starfish Association, a non-profit supporting children and families affected by HIV and AIDS. He started giving talks about sustainability, civil rights, and the importance of independent thinking. He even published a book of poetry. In interviews, he often spoke about mortality, not with fear, but with curiosity. He wasn't obsessed with legacy or image. If anything, he seemed more interested in not being remembered for just one thing. "I want to be the guy who shows up, gives everything, and disappears," he once said. There was no dramatic announcement that he was stepping back from Hollywood. He just quietly stopped chasing it. And the funny thing is, the more he pulled away, the more his fan base solidified. He didn't need to be everywhere to leave an impression. The people who got it really got it. By the 2000s, Rutger Hauer had settled into a new rhythm. He wasn't showing up in blockbusters anymore, but when he did appear, it meant something. You started seeing him pop up in darker, stranger corners of cinema, in low-budget horrors, in twisted indies, quiet kind of intensity only he could bring. In Sin City in 2005, he had a brief but memorable appearance as a corrupt cardinal surrounded by stylized violence, drenched in a monochrome light. He barely moved, barely spoke, and still he loomed large. Then there was Batman Begins. Christopher Nolan cast him as the calculating executive who pushes Bruce Wayne out of his own company. Again, a small role, but perfectly cast. Cold, corporate, dismissive, a man with no soul and no imagination. Exactly the kind of character Hauer could strip down to the bone. But his most iconic late career turn came in Hobo with a Shotgun in 2011. Originally a fake trailer attached to Grindhouse, it was expanded into a full-length blood-soaked fever dream. Hauer played the titular hobo, a man who sees the rot in the world and decides to do something about it. The film's absurd, violent, and unhinged, but Hauer plays it completely straight. Just pain and quiet rage and a kind of dignity that elevates the whole thing. Somehow it works. The film became a cult hit, especially among younger fans who didn't grow up with Blade Runner or The Hitcher. In his later years, Hauer never really slowed down. He kept taking roles, some big, some barely released. A strange German thriller here, a TV appearance there. He passed away on July 19th in 2019 in the Netherlands after a brief illness. That illness turned out to be pancreatic cancer, a cruel, fast-moving disease that often gives little warning. According to those close to him, Hauer had kept it private. There was no media coverage, no social media hints, no public farewell. The news didn't even break until a week later, and somehow that felt fitting. He'd lived his life just outside the spotlight, moving in and out of view, doing the work and disappearing again. The loss really did hit hard. Rutger Hauer didn't leave behind a traditional legacy. He didn't have a signature franchise or a shelf full of Oscars. What he left was something stranger. A trail of performances, some legendary, some barely seen, each one charged with tension, ambiguity, and a quiet intensity that really could not be faked. He gave us a moment in Blade Runner, a dying machine staring into the storm, grasping at memory, beauty, and time, and in those few lines, improvised from somewhere deep inside, he gave voice to something human, fragile, and fleeting. Rutger Hauer lived a life full of them. Moments on screen, moments alone in the Dutch countryside, moments few ever saw, but that mattered all the same. And like Batty, he didn't rage against the end. He accepted it, let it come quietly. All those moments may be lost in time, like tears and rain, but his, we remember. Thanks so much for watching. If you're new here, I release 2 full-length retrospectives every week, diving into the lives and careers of actors who left a mark, even if Hollywood doesn't talk about them much anymore. If you've been enjoying these videos, don't forget to like, subscribe, and maybe even share one with someone who loves great character actors as much as you do. And as ever, I look forward to seeing you all in the next one.